can begin your presentation whenever you are ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members when they get here. I appreciate your hearing about SB 751 by Senator Becker and myself. 751 establishes a 5-year pilot program to research the therapeutic use of psilocybin for veterans and inactive first responders. The pilot will be overseen by the University of California system and will study protocols for providing psilocybin treatment to specific target populations in strict compliance with FDA and DEA regulations. A few years ago, if you had told me I'd be involved in advocating for the use of psilocybin, you would have thought I was crazy, and I would have thought you were crazy for me thinking I was going to do it. But that's because, like so many others, I was unaware of the untapped potential that these compounds hold to help our veterans and first responders struggling with trauma-related mental health issues. Every day, an average of 17 veterans die by suicide. First responders, those who run toward danger to protect the rest of us, are more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty. These are individuals who have experienced repeated trauma, and too often are existing mental health treatments that simply do not work for them. Our veterans and our first responders are owed a debt of gratitude we will never, ever be able to repay. But if we can help them in this small way, I say shame on us for not trying to do so, and even sooner. As it stands, many of these heroes are now turning to underground or unregulated sources of psilocybin, or even traveling abroad to seek relief, without medical oversight and without the safety precautions that the state of California could offer. Our veterans and first responders are asking for this treatment to be made available to them, and we owe it to them to at least give it a try in a controlled, limited way, utilizing qualified medical professionals and researchers at the world's leading institutions of higher learning. California happens to be home to both, and we ought to take advantage of that fact by passing this bill. With that, I would like to invite our witnesses in support of the bill today, Dr. Brian Anderson from UCSF, University of California, San Francisco, and Angela Graham from the Siren Project to provide their testimony on the bill.
And the committee, thanks for having me here. My name is Dr. Brian Anderson. I'm a psychiatrist at San Francisco General Hospital and a faculty member at UCSF in the School of Medicine. I'm sharing my personal perspective and not that of the UC. I've studied psychedelics for over 15 years. I work at UCSF, I also work at UC Berkeley and collaborate with UCLA in this work. I can tell you psychedelic medicines have a remarkable potential for treating severe mental health and substance use disorders like those commonly suffered by veterans and first responders. This includes PTSD, depression, and addictions. Psilocybin, however, also does have risks, and that needs to be studied and mitigated. Importantly, the clinical outcomes of psilocybin therapy depends not just on the dose of the drug. It really depends on how it's administered, where, and by whom. Fundamentally, psilocybin therapy needs to be understood more as a procedure and not just a pill. And this is why studying how best to implement it in real-world settings now is important for preparing California to be ready to safely and effectively offer this unique form of care in the future when we have some form of regulated access to psilocybin. To date, the pharmaceutical industry and the NIH has not funded this type of real-world implementation research, but the University of California Office of the President has in the past. We have funded at least one study of ketamine-assisted therapy for methamphetamine use disorder in public health settings, and we can build off of that by offering a program of psilocybin therapy in real-world settings to help veterans and first responders now. This is compassionate use research that veterans and first responders are asking for. We've provided compassionate use studies for patients at risk of death from cancer and AIDS for decades, and we can do that for people struggling from mental health conditions. I ask you to please support 751. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Angela Graham. I'm a retired firefighter of almost 20 years. I'm also the co-founder and executive director of the Siren Project. We're a nonprofit funding and facilitating retreats for first responders using entheogenics, psychedelics, medicines to treat symptoms of post-traumatic stress. We're also a co-sponsor of the bill. My husband and I started this after having to navigate the system in search of my own mental health treatment, when all available modalities had failed. Fortunately, we had a friend who was a veteran to help connect us with trustworthy providers. Soon after, I got on a plane to San Diego, met up with a group of strangers, and we smuggled ourselves across the border to do drugs in Mexico. I had gotten to the point that I was having so many breakdowns In angry outbursts, I felt I needed to take extreme action to protect my son from all I was exposing him to. After my experience with these medicines, I was able to calm my anger and find peace like never before. Nothing had given me such immediate and comprehensive relief from my symptoms. I was finally able to be the mom my son deserves. Today, the fire service is more accepting of mental health issues than ever before. I personally had access to more therapy and therapeutic modalities in the last few years than when I started. Yet the suicide rates are climbing. The suicide rate for firefighters is 500% higher than it was 20 years ago. This is despite a more kinder and accepting fire service. We are 3 times as likely to die by suicide than on-duty activities. Not to mention the generational trauma being created and passed on. This is all despite more acceptance and available therapy. Clearly, what is legally available right now is not enough. Now, before we fall further behind, California needs to set the standard for safe, effective access to these crucial resources. These medicines may not be safe for everyone. It also takes a lot of work and support before and after a journey to see the benefits of these therapies. For these reasons, safeguards like medical screening and properly trained space holders are needed. This bill is not perfect, but it is a much needed step in the right direction. As we keep going back and forth on the details, people are waiting and suffering. Please show your support for all the first responders in your communities by supporting this bill, SB 751.
Thank you for your testimony. We will now move on to lead witnesses and support. We will now move on to support witnesses. Here in room 2100, please use the microphone outside the railing and state your name, organization, and position on the bill.
Madam Chair, Anthony Moline on behalf of Law Enforcement Action Partnership, another co-sponsor of the bill, and support. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Palmatier. I'm a former flight paramedic for the State Department's International Narcotics and Law Enforcement's Air Embassy Division. I'm also a current firefighter paramedic for the City of Mountain View, and I support this.
Thank you. Anybody else? We will now move on to lead witnesses in opposition, if there are any. The 2 lead witnesses may come forward and use the microphones at the table in front of us. Please begin when you're ready.
Is it working? There we go. Chair members, my name is Greg Burt with the California Family Council, and I rise in strong opposition to SB 571. This bill is not just premature, it is fundamentally illegal. The state of California does not have the legal authority to conduct psychedelic research outside oversight and approval of the federal government. Psychedelic substances like magic mushrooms remain classified as Schedule I under federal law. Without FDA and DEA approval, any research under SB 571 is not only invalid, it's illegal. If you want to make this treatment available long-term, you need to get federal clearance. Otherwise, exactly what are we doing here? I ask you plainly, do you believe in the rule of law? Because during your oath of office, each of you swore allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and promised to respect the authority of the federal government. That wasn't symbolic. It was a foundational commitment to our legal system. Yet this bill acts as if California is now an independent republic, free to disregard federal laws it finds inconvenient. Now to the second point, public safety and the unpredictability of magic mushrooms. 2 years ago, an Alaskan Airlines pilot named Joseph Emerson, after taking psychedelic mushrooms 2 days earlier, suffered a terrifying psychiatric break in mid-flight. Though he wasn't high at the time, the lingering effects of his trip caused him to believe he was in a dream. He attempted to shut down both engines, putting over 80 people at risk. He later said he thought crashing the plane would wake him up. If this is the kind of unpredictable mental state these drugs can induce, even days later, how can we responsibly administer them to vulnerable veterans and first responders? We must not confuse compassion with recklessness. We all want to help those who serve and sacrifice, but not by bypassing the law, and certainly not by endangering public safety. So please vote no. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning, Lieutenant Julio De Leon, representing the Riverside County Sheriff's Office, and Sheriff Chad Bianco. I just have a few comments. We definitely support the intent of the bill and the legislation and the attempt to rectify some of the effects that it has on our profession. I've been in this profession for the last 23 years, and I have personally been touched by a colleague of mine who recently shot herself and committed suicide. So this is near and dear to my heart and all of our hearts in public safety. However, I believe that this bill is premature. Introducing these substances has unpredictable psychological responses to include persistent psychosis. It lacks robust medical backing at this point, and it can induce hallucinogen persistent perception disorders, which includes disorganized thinking, paranoia, visual disturbances, and mood instability. And when we introduce these substances with people who have military and police tactics, as well as who also have firearms, this is dangerous to introduce this. And our message is we support the introduction of these substances, but how about we change the target population to someone or to a population that doesn't have these tactics and firearms, maybe domestic violence survivors. Let's try with them first, see if it works, and if it does, then we'll introduce it to public safety personnel to provide more public safety and accountability to these methodologies and substances. So with that, we stand in respectful opposition to this measure.
Thank you for your testimony. Are there any other opposition witnesses here in room 2100? If so, please use the microphone outside of the railing, and please only state your name, organization, and position on the bill. Seeing nobody getting up, we will now turn it back to our members. Do any of our members have questions or comments? Senator Chobok?
I'll help facilitate the conversation. I'm the only one. So I had the opportunity several years ago to actually meet with the groups that represented many of our law enforcement and our military folks about the level of depression and suicide rates in our state. And it was incredibly heartbreaking. And I think I share the same sentiments as Senator Jones that, prior to that, I would have probably said, absolutely not, and I'm still very hesitant with a lot of psychedelics being used. I have been always very supportive of medical marijuana to, when people are at that stage of cancer treatments or, whatever it may be, not supportive of recreational for many reasons. When this idea came through, I was also very hesitant, but I do think that the opposition actually made really good points, and I don't know where, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions for clarification. I do want to, I appreciate the comments by Mr. Burt with regards to, our job as legislators is to help direct and create law, and we're also sworn to uphold, the law in our positions and our Constitution. So on that end, I'm going to have a couple of questions with regards to how does this facilitate this research that is being done, or pilot program? How does that work within the federal law, considering the fact is that it's still considered a Class 1? And correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know the drugs very well and the levels that they're in, but I believe that how does this work within federal law? In our state to be able to facilitate the law or to facilitate the study or the pilot program. Number two, and this will go to any of, whether it's support or opposition, you folks are the experts. I know Mr. Hu here is an attorney, so I respect his opinion. And then number two, why this particular group and not someone, say, without the military experience or even access to to weapons. And, I'm a huge proponent of the Second Amendment, but there is some concern with regards to, okay, you're testing this psychedelics with people who literally have military experience, and where does their access to, say, guns come into play? Because that is a very fine line where, I'm protective of your Second Amendment. However, and I'm a little concerned because I don't want there to be a stigma in attaining or pursuing behavioral health, and the infringement that may have on your other liberties as a citizen. And now you're meshing it with psychedelics. And so it's a little muddy for me right now in trying to balance all of the personal liberties, not having the stigma behind behavioral health, seeking treatment, and going outside and doing research for medical purposes. So I'm muddled in all of that context. So any clarity would be incredibly helpful.
Senator, I would be happy to answer those. So first off, as an investigator at one of the UCs, I do conduct these studies. We conduct them entirely federally legally. We have FDA oversight, DEA oversight, and the bill requests us to conduct this research, so we would not be allowed to do federally illegal research through the UCs, so that just wouldn't happen, and we have all the approvals for federal and state regulations to be covered. That's to answer that part. The drugs themselves, the medicines, would come from DEA-regulated sources. So this is not just from a dispensary somewhere in California. It has to come from a manufacturer permitted by DEA to provide for research. 2, on risk. People who have access to firearms are also probably at higher risk of suicide. And so we always take the context of clinical care into consideration when enrolling someone in a study. One thing that we often do is we don't just say, do they have the diagnosis, but do they have the support it takes to go through this? It's also why this would be embedded in or sort of done with community clinics. So the idea is that these patients are known to providers there. They've gone through risk assessments, and they're being referred by clinicians who know them, who also think this could be helpful for them and can help follow them and reduce risk over time. Again, we're not just giving a pill. This is a procedure, and there's a lot of wraparound care that we already use to keep this as safe as possible in research settings.
Okay. Yeah. Through the chair. It's the chair's prerogative.
As far as my understanding, reading the bill, although the bill requires the testing to be done according to FDA standards, it does not require FDA to oversee the testing. There are currently, my understanding, several psychedelic studies that are approved by the FDA currently going forward. What we're doing here in California is we're bypassing that approval system, and we're simply setting up our own. Right, and so we are not getting FDA approval. We're not turning to the DEA to get approval from them before the studies start. That is not required in the bill, and if I am wrong, I'd love to be corrected.
I can address if you'd like, both issues, I think, briefly. Regarding the FDA oversight and approval, that's one of the reasons why we're putting it in the UC system, is so that it's a bona fide, trusted system doing the testing and the research. Both the committee analysis and the Republican analysis, or I should say neither, the committee analysis or Republican analysis found that to be an issue. And the FDA has recognized psilocybin as a breakthrough therapy, which does open up certain doors for it to be researched and pursued. I think we all trust the UC system to do it properly, as Dr. Anderson is communicating. Regarding the firearm issue, I think that is a legitimate issue. I understand the opposition's comments on that. That's kind of a late point that they've raised. This concept of psilocybin has been in the works here in the legislature for 4 years. If you all remember, 4 years ago, when it first came up, it was opening it up to certain recreational uses as well. Many of us did not support that. The governor's veto, that bill actually passed and got to the governor's desk. The governor vetoed it and asked for the legislature to reconsider the issue with many of the parameters that we built into the bill last year that passed the Senate and unfortunately got held up in Assembly Health. This year, the bill is even more narrowly tailored and more prescriptive on the research that can take place and how the research is to be handled. For myself, there is a bright line between therapy and recreation on this particular substance. Based on the same conversations I've had with the veterans community and the first responder community is how I got to the point of thinking that there is a chance that this therapy will be helpful. These former first responders, inactive first responders, and veterans, if they have access to firearms, have access to firearms. The ones that are asking for this are already mentally ill and already suffering with PTSD and are already subjecting their families to these urges. And the hope here is that this therapy will fix that for them and that they won't be in danger of harming themselves or others with those firearms that they already have access to.
Madam Chair, may I ask one more question?
Yes, of course.
To the Riverside County Sheriff's representative here today, I'm kind of curious, and I don't want to open a can of worms, but maybe I will. I'm curious because I do have a lot of sympathy and empathy for our law enforcement and our military folks who are, or I should say, just public safety and military folks that are suffering from behavioral health and want to ensure that we create an environment where we don't stigmatize it and they're comfortable with reaching out and seeking help. How does that all play in with their ability to retain, their ability to have access to guns per se?
Sure. Thank you for the question. First, I'd like to respond to Senator Jones. This is not a late introduction of this concern we have. We have objected to this bill since Senator Wiener introduced it a few years ago, and we've included this argument in our previous letters in opposition. To address your concerns, Senator, once you retire, you are eligible to have a CCW so long as you don't have any 5150 encounters, right? You don't have those hospitalization on your record. And so one can have PTSD as a retired law enforcement officer and have a CCW and be allowed to carry a firearm so long as that person hasn't been hospitalized into a mental psychiatric institution. So they are able to have firearms and possess firearms. And so we're just concerned that the mixing of these substances and the long-term effects and how they interact with someone who has these training and firearms in their possession.
Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and just check to see if Senator Laird has any comments or questions on this. Okay. I just want to take a moment to, first of all, Senator Jones, thank you for presenting on behalf of Senator Becker. I am very supportive of your bill, SB 751, and want to share with you that I actually, in college, did research in this area back in 2011. So I remember doing a presentation on this very subject, and it was around some of the early research that was done by Johns Hopkins University, showing early results that psilocybin treatment can be very helpful with improving depression, dealing with anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and some of the early kind of results of that. I appreciate what the opposition has raised just in terms of the concerns around firearms ownership, other issues that may come up. I think that that is very well something that could be addressed in a study that the UC can perform. And I also want to highlight, too, this is not going to be a legalization of psilocybin for the masses. This is allowing for a treatment to be better researched to determine its efficacy so that it can be better utilized for folks that need it. And I think that that is something that is important. The UC system is one of the premier research institutions, and not just in this country, but in the entire world. So I think allowing, that to be done is something that's important, and it is a worthwhile conversation. We've been tinkering for years. I mean, as I told you, I first wrote a report on this. You can actually find it online. Back in 2011, we're now in 2025. That was 14 years ago. So there's more research that needs to be done in this area. If we continue to not do research, what is going to happen, and what I have found from friends of mine that, are dealing with very severe depression and anxiety, is that they will seek those modalities elsewhere without the proper guidance and folks kind of overseeing the process. And that, in my opinion, actually presents an even greater danger is to not have a science-driven approach, a research-driven approach as folks seek that out. And, I just want to share part of the reason I even initially, did this research and then did this report back in 2011 is because I myself have, struggled significantly with depression and was really fascinated to hear and read these stories. And I'm very moved also by your testimony as well to hear about the impacts of this. So, research and these kinds of studies are worthwhile. They're very valuable. I understand what the opposition raises about firearms, and yet, as you described, and I'm so sorry to hear about the friend that you mentioned who recently lost her life. I have friends that have lost their lives to suicide. I have friends that, a friend that attempted suicide and was not successful and is now permanently disabled. And that is also another factor to consider in this, that if we don't help these folks, this is something very real that people deal with. And so I think that this is a righteous effort to try to figure this out, to further look into this, using the valuable systems that we already have in place to look at that research for a very specific population, and for our university professors to be very thoughtful and what we need to consider as we go about that. So I will absolutely be supporting your bill and appreciate you bringing this forward, Senator Jones.
Thank you.
So, and with that, I will have you close.
Madam Chair, I will take your comments as my close. Very well said, and I agree with everything that you said.
And I will entertain a motion. Okay, we have a motion from Senator Ochoa Bogue, and the motion for SB 751 is due pass to the Senate Appropriations Committee.
Senator Perez.
Aye.
Perez, aye. Ochoa Bogue.
Not voting.
Cabaldon. Choi. Cortese. Aye. Cortese, aye. Gonzalez. Laird.
Great, we will put that bill on call. Thank you all.